Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is Martine, and if you are new here, I do videos on Vedic astrology mainly, but also with some tropical insights, and I focus on both relationship and natal astrology. And if you like this video and you would like to see more content from me, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to my channel. Also consider clicking the notifications bell if you want to see when I will post a new video. Also, if you are interested in a private reading, I do readings in astrology on a variety of topics ranging from relationship readings to career to transits for 2-3 years, or solar return charts or predictions for 1 year, etc. You are free to email me at the email address that I will leave in the video description, and I can send you a pricing list and reading options and any other details that you might require. Also, I want to mention that I have started membership options on this channel, and the short of it, just to give you the short perks that you will get if you choose to join the membership section, you will get 1 extra video per month for each membership stage or tier. So for the first tier, you will get 1 extra video per month. For the second tier, you will get 2 extra videos per month, so you will have access to level 1 and level 2 videos. And for level 3 or third tier, you will get 3 extra videos per month. The level 1 and level 3 videos are going to be on a variety of topics, so basically anything related to astrology, but it will be content that is not shown on my regular usual videos, right? So this is members only exclusive content, and it can range from, tips and tricks on how to read a horoscope to, I haven't done this yet, but I plan on doing maybe members only astrological synastry for famous couples, for instance, or the analysis of famous people's horoscopes, but then I can also get into divisional charts, etc., etc. So all kinds of things. The level 1 or second tier of membership options is especially related to synastry astrology topics, meaning relationship-oriented astrology. So this could be things like how to discover which kind of partner archetype is right for you according to your horoscope, or it could be, again, different characteristics, whether you're going to have a good marriage according to your horoscope or a less than stellar marriage. But you can find more concrete examples in the lists that you will find in the video description, because I have added the playlists where you can already see all the videos that I have posted in each members section. So yeah, you can see what videos you will have access to from the ones that I have already done. But I will continue to post, like I said, 1 extra video per month for each level of membership. And in addition to that, in the members only section, you will have access to members only polls, and you will also have priority when it comes to getting your comments replied to on my channel. And you will also have stickers that basically show up next to your username that show that you are a member, and a couple of exclusive emojis. All right, so that's pretty much all the perks that you can have as a member on my channel. If you're curious, you can check the video description for more details as well, or you can click the join button under any of my videos to also see the prices, because the prices will be shown in your local currency. All right, in addition to the members only section, I also have a tarot channel, and I post there semi-regularly, and I will be linking the tarot channel in the video description as well as in the pinned comment. It's called Martine's Tarot. So if you are curious about tarot, if you're into it, maybe check out my channel, maybe subscribe. I would greatly appreciate it. Thank you very much for listening to this intro. And now I'm going to get straight into today's topic. So today's topic is going to be about the 12th house lord and the positive associations that come with the 12th house lord. I have done a part 1 for this video, which was mainly about the potential negatives of the 12th house lord, and how it might play out depending on which house the Lord of the 12th house falls into in your natal chart, either with respect to your natal chart ascendant or Lagna, or with respect to your Chandra Lagna to some extent as well. The Chandra Lagna being the moon sign taken as the ascendant, and basically looking at the rest of your horoscope from the perspective of where they sit with relation to the Chandra Lagna, so the moon sign, basically. Just to give you an example very quickly, that means that if, let's say, you have moon in Aries in your horoscope and you have ascendant in Pisces, and you have, let's say, Mercury in Taurus, right? So that means that according to the D1 ascendant, which would be Pisces, your Mercury is sitting in, let's see, in the third house, right? It would be sitting in the third house, right? But if you look at it from the Chandra Lagna perspective, meaning from your moon being in Aries, it's your Mercury sitting in the second house, because you're counting from the position of the moon sign. So basically, that's all it means. The Chandra Lagna means that you take the moon to be your ascendant, and you look at the rest of your horoscope placements by relation to that moon placement. This is especially important for you to check if the moon sign in your horoscope is in a lower degree than your ascendant. So this means that, for instance, again, if you have moon in Aries in 10 degrees and you have ascendant in Pisces in 19 degrees, for instance, this means that the moon placement is in a lower degree than the ascendant. So this is to be looked at irrespective of the signs that the moon and the ascendant are placed in. You just look at the degrees, right? So again, 10 degrees is lower than 19 degrees. So the moon sign becomes particularly important to check in your horoscope. Now, technically, the Chandra Lagna is especially important when you are checking things like your inner landscape, what makes you happy. So it has a lot more to do with your emotions, your happiness. But as I said, especially when the degree is lower than the ascendant, the degree of the moon is lower than the ascendant, it can actually impact your overall life on a very, very deep level, really. And I have seen this a lot. I've also mentioned it when I did my, yearly prediction videos, which I haven't gotten to do this year, unfortunately, because I didn't have the time for it. But last year's, like the last 2 or 3 years, I have done yearly predictions, and I did mention it, that you can also look at those predictions from the perspective of your Chandra Lagna, not just from your regular ascendant, especially, again, when the moon is in a lower degree. And I've actually checked this over time with experience, and a lot of the times the Chandra Lagna can actually show a lot more than the regular Lagna. Just bear in mind, Lagna means ascendant in Vedic terms. So I'm sorry that I keep switching from one to another, but the Vedic terms are basically growing on me, and mostly it's called Lagna there. Okay? But yeah, it's important to check. That's what I wanted to say. So, talking about the 12th house, by the way, if you hear background noise, that's fire from the fireplace. I am not in my usual setting. Yeah, there's nothing I can do about it because that is my heating, and it is December and it's cold. Just wanted to mention it. Another thing that I wanted to say, is talking about the 12th house lord through houses. See, the 12th house normally is actually seen as a pretty negative energy. In Vedic astrology, it's especially known as one of the most negative houses, together with the 6th and the 8th house. 8th houses. So the 12th house in particular is connected to loss. So this could be loss of pretty much anything, depending on which house and which, house lords the 12th house impacts, or which signs, etc. You could have loss connected to those areas of your life that are associated with the 12th house and the 12th house lord. That's the general theory. However, it is not all doom and gloom, and as I have mentioned this many times, I'm not fatalistic. There are positives, and there are always silver linings to every placement and every configuration in a horoscope, and the 12th house is no exception. And the benefits of the 12th house, again, if you're interested in the more negative impacts of the 12th house lord through houses, I'm going to link the first part that I did for this video in the video description. You can go check it out. But the more positive aspects, see, have to do with intuition. See, the 12th house is the house of the unconscious. It's also connected to bedroom pleasures to some extent. It's also seen as, well, not just the personal unconscious or subconscious, but the collective subconscious, or the collective consciousness, so to speak. So the 12th house has to do with inspiration, faith, imagination, everything that has to do with intuition, basically. So it can be linked to even psychic ability. It can even be linked to psychic abilities. Depending on what else is going on there. For instance, if you see connections between the 12th and the 4th and the 8th houses, either one of them, or especially if it's connected to all three of them, then you could have a very strong indicator of someone who has a very, very, very sharp intuition, maybe even potentially psychic. So yeah, that's one thing that I can mention right off the bat. The 12th house, though, it is a very subtle energy because it's connected to Pisces and water. So also because its connotations are inherently negative, the positives that come from it are not going to be huge. But again, if you learn to work with the energy of the 12th house, you can reap a lot of benefits in the areas with that the 12th house is active in your horoscope. One thing, for instance, is that the 12th house, for instance, from a psychological, not just psychological, sorry, from every perspective, like I mentioned, it is connected to loss. So that's including, but not limited to financial losses. However, when you have, let's say, a positive transit connected to the 12th house or benefics connected to the 12th house, then you could actually have the reverse of that, which is that you could have sudden windfalls, for instance, in the areas that the 12th house is impacting. And again, for this, you do have to really check transits and dashas and mahadashas to see how the 12th house becomes activated, right? It's not enough to just look at configurations, but this is true for pretty much everything that you check in a horoscope. Just thought I would mention it. Or you could have a loss that is beneficial. The 12th house also has to do with retirement to some extent, like the end of the work cycle. But again, won't get too much into it. So very briefly, I want to go through the 12th house lord through each house of the zodiac, of the natal chart. Again, either from the ascendant or from the moon sign, and see what potential characteristics or what potential results you could get from these placements. So let's see when the 12th house lord falls into the first house. When the 12th house lord falls into the first house and it brings the more beneficial aspects, this is a placement where, first of all, it can be a rags to riches sort of story, depending on what else is going on there. But the 12th house normally, it can bring, on the more negative side, it can bring, let's say, physical weakness, health problems. Especially mental problems could actually be a problem here with this situation, or anything that will somehow bring isolation to you. But let me not dwell too much on the negatives. I have talked about those in the first part. The positives here is that you can be really known and valued for spiritual knowledge. So if I'm not mistaken, now I could be mistaken, I should have checked, but I can't check right now. But I'm pretty sure I remember seeing this in Teal Swan's horoscope, and I know I'm not some kind of number one fan of hers, so I don't want to trigger anyone because I know she's a pretty controversial person. But I'm talking here about, strictly looking at the positive things that are going on for her. The truth is she has become pretty successful in the spiritual world. And if I remember correctly, again, I'm pretty sure she has a contact between the first house and the 12th house. I think maybe even the 12th lord in the first. I'm not 100% sure. I should check again. But it's just one example that came to my mind, irrespective of what is going on in her horoscope. Teal Swan is actually a good example of what you might see with this particular configuration. So you could become a person that is really standing out, because the first house is about how you stand out. It becomes your identity and what people recognize you for and how people see you, right? Your personality. So if you have this contact, or again, contact, I should have said this. Contact doesn't just necessarily mean the 12th house lord falling in the first house, right? That's one aspect, but you could also have this with, let's say, if the 12th and the first house lords are conjunct, or if they are having a sign change, which is an interesting concept from Vedic astrology. So, for instance, if you have the lord of the first house, let's say you have again, ascendant in Aries, and you have the 12th house. So automatically in Vedic astrology, if you have ascendant in Aries, then the 12th house is going to be in Pisces. There are no other options. And say you have Jupiter in Aries, then, well, if you have Jupiter in Aries, you also have the traditional placement of the 12th in the first. Maybe not the best example. Let me give you another example. Let me think. Yes, let's say if you have ascendant in Taurus, okay? You have ascendant in Taurus, 12th house is in Aries, and now let's say you have Mars in Libra, right? And you have Venus is Scorpio, right? So this is a sign interchange. I'm not exactly sure if there's a more technical term for it. I'm pretty sure there is if you dig in Vedic astrology. What it basically means is that the lord of the 12th house falls in the sign that is governed by the lord of the first house, and vice versa, right? So it's kind of like it's like they're both influencing one another, right? Because Scorpio is ruled by Mars and Libra is ruled by Venus. Just to give you an example, okay? But in any case, sticking strictly to the Lord of the 12th house in the first. So this is the positive. This is one of the most positive signs, is that you can really gain recognition by portraying yourself, or like by focusing on a field where you can really develop your spiritual gifts and maybe become a figure of, like a spiritual teacher or someone who also focuses on healing. But it doesn't have to be just spirituality. It can be anything connected to the 12th house. So this could even be, let's say, someone who works on rehab centers, or again, 12th house, by the way, also deals with addictions. So you could be working in a rehab center, for instance, anything where people are isolated. So working with prisons, for instance, working with hospitals. These are areas where you are bound to get recognition. And also the 12th house is about humanitarian work, and it's about emotions. It's also about imagination and creativity. So any field where you portray yourself in a way that is very creative and mysterious, maybe, is very useful, and you're actually going to gain more recognition if you go for areas that are ruled by the 12th house, or areas, again, where you are seen as a creative, spiritual person, also empathic and sharing and giving and all that. If you have 12th house lord falling into the second house, this shows that you could gain from foreign lands. Second house is the house of fixed assets, for instance. It also is the house of the family of origin. So a positive side of this is that, for instance, you could gain a lot of spiritual knowledge from your family of origin. Maybe your family of origin is quite religious. It doesn't necessarily have to be just religious. They could be very spiritual. Whichever the case is, the 12th house signifies faith, right? So that feeling of faith, irrespective if it comes from an organized religion or, I don't know, something new age, even something like astrology, tarot. Of course, a lot of what you can actually see if it's going to be likely to be organized religion versus something more, New Age, but I won't get into details. I'm sticking strictly to the general descriptions here. So yeah, that's a positive side, right? So you could be also, like I said, foreign lands, because 12th house is foreign lands. And again, 12th house is spirituality, faith, imagination, the collective subconscious. This could actually be a great placement for someone who gets into psychotherapy, because the second house being the house of family origins, right? Family of origin and the origins of the family. This shows that the person could have very deep insights into, first of all, their own family dynamics. Their intuition could be very sharp in understanding what is happening between, let's say, the family members. And because from an early age, they are exposed to, usually when you have this configuration, you're going to have situations where somehow you will, I don't want to say you will be traumatized, but it could even be like that, right? So there could be some situations that force you to become more sensitive and more attuned to the sensitivities, to the subtleties happening in your environment when it comes to, let's say, interactions between family members, etc. And this can also be a great placement for actually gaining from spiritual activities, but also, again, gaining from anything that has to do with 12th house matters. So again, places of isolation, hospitals, prisons, rehab centers, spiritual retreats, so on and so forth, could be gaining from religion, right? Maybe you could be a preacher or, work for a church, or for any kind of religious organization. 12th house, again, like I said, so foreigners, foreign lands, it could also show you could gain from foreigners and foreign lands. It also can be very specifically, because the second house is also about the food. You could have a taste for exotic foods, or you could be interested in some kind of a cuisine from a foreign culture, and that could become a source of income even, or it could just be a personal preference. The 12th house lord falling into the third house. This is interesting. This is also a placement where a person is going to struggle with courage, to be honest, because, see, the third house normally is the house of proactivity, let's say, of entrepreneurial spirit, of being self-motivated. So how much courage do you have? How much motivation do you have deep inside, without waiting for someone else to tell you what to do or to motivate you or push you? It basically shows your ability to be a go-getter, right? And the 12th house is an energy of renunciation to some extent. So here's the thing. It doesn't necessarily mean that person who has this configuration is going to be weak-willed. Some people might actually say that. But again, with the 12th house, what this shows is that you're going to have a hard time staying motivated and staying on track with any goal that does not involve some kind of 12th house energy. So this means being, let's say, humanitarian, right? Wanting to help others. 12th house is also about sacrifice and self-sacrifice, focusing on faith, either sharing faith, inspiring faith to others. Again, has to do with emotions and emotional issues and matters of the heart. You could have success in, again, using your imagination. However, last but not least, you could also gain from travel a lot, because both the 12th and the third houses are travel houses. Third house is more about short-term, short-distance travels. 12th house is about long-term, long-distance travels. So, for instance, you could do great in a travel agency here, or you could do great opening an export-import business here. I wonder if, I was just thinking now that this would be a great configuration for someone like Bezos, for instance, but I haven't checked his horoscope. I don't know if he has any context between the third and the 12th house in his horoscope. But that could actually be something that you could be good at, import-export businesses. This also shows you just gain a lot of courage and a lot of inspiration to take action from your faith. And or people from foreign origins, or people who are spiritual and or have lived in isolation, have spent long times in isolation. So people who were committed either, let's say, in mental institutions or prisons, Or again, it could just be people who are very religious or voluntarily committed themselves to something, like let's say a nun or a priest. I think a monk, maybe not a priest. You know what I mean. People who have chosen a spiritual path, they could really bring you inspiration. If you have 12th house lord in the 4th house, again, this is one of those placements that I mentioned initially, can bring a very, very sharp intuition. So even bordering on psychic, especially if you also have some 8th house energy thrown in the mix here. This shows that, however, okay, we'll not dwell on the negatives. I did say that. Again, if you want to see the more negative aspects, you can check the video that I will leave in the video description. I was just about to say a negative, but I'm pretty sure that I mentioned it in that video, so I won't go over it. Again, a positive, though, is you could actually learn to feel at home with very little material comforts. So you could be someone who easily makes yourself at home just about anywhere. You could actually be someone who relocates at some point in your life. You might choose to relocate to some faraway place or spend long periods of time abroad, and you could be gaining a lot from that experience. It could turn to be some kind of huge life altering experience. It can also mean that you can gain property from property or vehicles, actually, or anything to do with real estate. You can gain these things from dealing with foreigners, people from foreign cultures, or people who are spiritual, people who work with others who are in isolation, which means, again, anyone who's involved in hospital, caring for the elderly, caring for prisoners or prisons, rehabilitation centers, spiritual retreats, right? So there any kind of situation that you can think of where someone has been either committed or has voluntarily entered a situation of isolation. So dealing with people or professions from these areas could bring you a property or a vehicle somehow. Or any kind of sense of stability, really, a sense of home. Another thing is you can actually feel at home in these areas, which sounds maybe a little bit creepy to some people, but it can actually turn out to be true. So, for instance, you might feel at home in a religious institution. Maybe you feel at home at church, right? Maybe you go to church often to feel at peace emotionally and be happy. Another thing is you can actually particularly gain a property that is elevated physically. So like in the higher levels of a high rise, for instance, because the 12th house is far away from the 4th house, and 4th house is real estate or home base, right? So the 12th house can show, maybe you'll get a penthouse at some point, or you will live in a penthouse at some point. This is really specific, but it is one potential interpretation. This can also show that your mother was a really spiritual person and or could be from a foreign culture, by comparison to the place you were born in or your homeland. So yeah, you could gain a lot from that with respect to spiritual knowledge, especially. It can also show that your mother has really helped you increase your imagination. It can also show that early on in life, your early education could have really encouraged the development of spiritual gifts, of imagination, of creativity, and these are things that you can really use to get by in life. If the 12th house lord falls into the 5th house, you could have children that are very spiritually elevated, that have a lot of understanding, that are also very psychically gifted, creative. You could also have children with a foreigner, because the 12th house is faraway lands, foreign cultures. So this could literally be for some of you that you will have children abroad and or with someone from a foreign culture. If you also have 12th house in the 5th, it can show you can gain even when it comes to risky ventures, although it's not really advised. You have to be really careful about this. And actually, if you do have contacts between the 12th and the 5th house, it's probably a good idea to get like a personal consultation to see what is going on there on a more in-depth level, because if you don't have the right configurations, it can turn out to be disastrous for you if you invest in the wrong things. It is, though, generally a good configuration if you want to gain from any kind of creative activity. If you want to, let's say, work for nonprofits or invest in nonprofits, it could be a good configuration if you want to work in export-import and seek to gain money out of that, and or any kind of activity that has to do with isolation, people living and working in isolation, like hospitals, prisons, retreats, spiritual retreats, rehab centers, anything that you can think of where a person lives and works in isolation. So these are areas that you could gain from, especially when it comes to speculative gains. So even something like stock markets. Again, when it comes to import, export, I don't know, the stocks for, I don't know if there are stocks for this, but anything that is connected to, let's say you want to invest in stocks, you are better off choosing a company that is from a very far away place, from a different continent, for instance, or maybe pharmaceutical companies. 12th house also has to do with health, especially mental health, but with the healthcare system in general, actually. You are also a very creative person, so you can gain from any kind of creative activity, actually, because both the 12th and the 5th house are very, very expressive. The 12th house is more about the collective subconscious imagination. 5th house is about actual creativity and self-expression, especially dramatic arts, but it can be connected to any kind of art form. So you can actually create works of art where you are able to touch the masses because you are very good at feeling the pulse of things, feeling maybe even things that a lot of people are thinking, but nobody is actually talking about these things out loud. So yeah, you could actually really get attention from a lot of people if you get into an art form, become self-expressive somehow. This also shows that you could gain by studying 12th house matters. So spiritual topics, religious topics, again, could even be, import, export type business, trading with people from faraway lands. But 12th house is also about the sea because it's naturally connected to Pisces, right? So you could have the sea, you could have beverages, for instance. So, I don't know, studying marine biology, studying, again, maybe shipments. I mean, again, if you are interested in international or export import, I think shipping by sea, on the sea, is becoming increasingly more popular, and it's going to become increasingly more popular as an economic form of trading and sending goods from one place to another. So just a few ideas, right? So 12th house can mean that. 12th house can also mean anything with isolation, like I said, right? So studying, let's say, to become a nurse could also potentially be connected to the 12th house, or anything that has to do also with working for classes of people that are, let's say, disadvantaged one way or another, working with NGOs that help others or help animals to some extent, or especially the sea in this case with the 12th house. Yeah, things like that. Or just, again, working with anyone who is living in a situation of isolation, for either because they chose it or whether they chose it or didn't choose it, right? Same thing. People who live in isolation, whether it's prisoners, let's say patients who are going through palliative care, stuff like that. When the 12th house is falling into the 6th house, the positives of this is that actually your enemies can easily disappear. If you might actually have to deal with a lot of enemies, I will say this, but they can easily disappear, or they will disappear faster if you just ignore them, right? So if you have this kind of configuration, it's not a good idea to become very vengeful or very focused on your enemies and your competition. Instead, try to ignore them as much as possible and just focus on what it is that you want to do. The 12th house and the 6th house shows that you can definitely gain from finding work and work or any kind of dealings connected to healthcare, especially healthcare where you have to be in the hospital a lot, in the hospital or any kind of place of isolation. So this could even be, let's say, working for a mental hospital, working for, I don't know, any kind of hospital really, where people are sitting there in isolation for long periods of time. That could be one option. Another option, again, you can also be favored if you go for a veterinary profession with this placement. Also, when it comes to getting a job, you are better off finding a job working for, let's say, employers that are from faraway places, so not from like local businesses, right? So with these placements, you can easily find work for multinational companies. And again, I'm speaking here about people who have jobs because the 6th house is more about the job and the everyday activity. You can also actually, with this placement, you have to be very careful with respect to your habits, because with this placement, more than others, you are likely to be sensitive, and your sensitivity, especially on a mental, emotional plane, can really impact your health. So you can actually gain a lot health-wise from keeping your mind and your subconscious especially as healthy and as clean as possible. So this means things like not mulling over the past, going to therapy, keeping a good sleep schedule. The 12th house is also about sleep. Doing things like meditation, focusing on having a strong sense of faith, because 12th house is faith. Things like this, really. So also potentially spending time in isolation, not all the time, but every now and then could actually be important for you health-wise. Especially if you have, let's say, digestive issues. That's especially with the intestines, issues with the intestines. You can also easily find employment in any 12th house related area. So this means places of isolation, like I said, hospitals, religious institutions, prisons, maybe any place that you can think of where that has to do with people working in isolation, living in isolation for prolonged periods of time. Again, like I said, export-import businesses, or it could be, any business that is just far away, like comes from foreign cultures, implies that you will have to deal with foreigners on a regular basis, especially far away places. So 12th house is like different continents, as far away from you as possible. That could be a thing. Another thing is you can gain employment in anything that has to do with NGOs, working for others, being, what's the word? Charitable, right? So maybe even getting work for a charity organization. Doing charity can be beneficial for you, of course, on a karmic level. Another potentially positive aspect of this, it may not be a great positive, but it is one that can happen, is it's pretty difficult for people to stay hidden if they don't like you. So you may not think of this as a great positive, but believe me, it is a great positive, because a lot of people, have to deal with enemies that are hidden. Because 12th house is hidden enemies, 6th house is more about open enemies, people that are directly in competition with you. So when you have 12th house and the 6th house connected, it can show that the enemies that you have will not stay secret for long, right? So you won't have, let's say, someone who pretends to be your friend for 10 years and then stabs you in the back. That's unlikely to happen in your case. Of course, it depends a lot on what else is going on in your horoscope. But generally with this placement, your enemies will show very quickly. They will they will not be able to hide for long. You will figure out what their intentions are, and the fact that they're not on your side. That's kind of a minor positive with this aspect, okay? Another thing is, actually, speaking of competition, you can gain from competition in foreign lands, or again, by competing with people from foreign lands or from faraway places. Or you can gain in competition again when it comes to any kind of work connected to all of the previous areas that I've mentioned are connected to the 12th house. Yeah, these are some positives, all right? If you have 12th house lord in the 7th house, here the 7th house is the spouse archetype, right? The spouse, the husband / wife archetype, the marriage, and it also shows sexuality to some extent. So 12th house in the 7th tends to show, I don't know if this is a plus or a minus, but it can show a pretty healthy sex drive. It can also show your spouse, but actually especially has a healthy sex drive. So that could be a positive or a negative depending on the kind of person you are. Again, another potential interpretation, maybe not necessarily positive, but again, depending, for some people it could be a positive, for others it could be a negative. But this is one indicator that can show a foreign spouse, someone who comes from faraway places, because the 12th house is the house of faraway places. So yeah, you could marry a foreigner or someone who comes from a different culture, different background. But with the 12th house especially, it can show you actually will marry someone who is coming from a faraway land. One thing, though, is that there might be potential conflicts with the spouse, the partner, the life partner. Let's say a little bit more than average, but I won't dwell on that too much because this is about the positives. Anyway, so having 12th house in the 7th also can show you are very good at understanding an audience. You're the kind of person who probably is pretty good at reading the vibe of a room or an audience, even like large audiences of people. You can actually gain from, let's say, any position where you work in one-on-one situations, especially in areas connected to 12th house. So this could be working with hospitals, prisons, rehab centers, spiritual retreats, any kind of activities connected to spirituality, or any kind of activity that has to do with isolation. It can also be import-export businesses, working with people from faraway places, foreign lands, working with anything that has to do with the sea, maritime activities. So being like, let's say, a consultant of some kind, let's say, I don't know, doing international law, pertaining to trading at sea, something. Or one thing that I can think about is, there was this documentary that I saw about, what the hell are they called? Right, cruise ships, right? Cruise ships are pretty shady. This is not about cruise ships, but just thought I would throw it in there because it's a pretty shady business, and how they find all kinds of legal loopholes to get away with really bad behavior, illegal stuff, because of the legal loopholes they find about international waters. So, for instance, just an example, 7th house is about the justice system. So this could be a great example, actually, learning maritime law, for instance. That could be a great position for someone who has this configuration. Another positive is your spouse will tend to be spiritual. 12th house, 12th house falling in the 7th house, or any kind of contact between the 12th and the 7th, actually, but especially when the 12th falls in the 7th house, the spouse will take on that 12th house energy. So this is a spiritual person. Also likely, like I said, to come from a foreign background, but spiritual. And could also be, like I said, someone who has a healthy sex drive, a romantic as well, creative, imaginative. This can also show that you will do well in partnership-based business, but only, again, if it is connected to 12th house matters. So any of the areas of activities that I have mentioned previously, and or if they are motivated on an emotional level. So 12th house is a pretty emotional energy. It's about spirituality, it's about being of service. So when you have this contact, you have this very strong desire to help others, to feel like you are contributing in a spiritual sense, maybe in a charitable sense. Yeah, so you're probably going to want to work in areas where you can help people. And these are areas that you're going to get benefit from, definitely. Also, with the 12th and the 7th house, like I said, you're going to gain from working in one-on-one situations. So you can be also any kind of, let's say, alternative healer, like maybe getting into Reiki, teaching meditation, and you can also become a very good speaker as well. So addressing an audience or addressing an audience or just anyone really, you can be very persuasive because you have that very intuitive understanding of the person in front of you or of the people in front of you. Like you can really feel other people's energies, and somehow be convincing when it comes to making them see things from your perspective. This can also be good with sales, by the way, depending a lot on what else is going on in the horoscope. 12th house. 12th house lord in the 8th house. This is another placement, just like 12th house in the 4th house, that shows very, very strong intuition. However, both the 12th and the 8th houses, not however, actually, these two things probably go hand in hand. It's probably because the 12th house and the 8th house are not happy places, being conjunct or let's say connected in any way, that you tend to get high intuition in life, sharp intuition, because it's the people who suffer the most that develop usually the strongest psychic understandings or the strongest spiritual knowledge out there. But I won't dwell on this concept very much. But 12th house in the 8th house can definitely show that you are going to have bordering on psychic level of intuition. So you can have a very sharp understanding of things. You can pick up other people's energies. Again, very specific, but with this, you can really literally be psychic, like literally talk to the dead, because 8th house is the death. 12th house to some extent is also connected to the death. So it could actually be something like that. 8th house is also transformation, and 12th house is spirituality. So here it's really important to choose your faith carefully, your belief system carefully, because your belief system can make or break you, basically. Your faith, though, your sense of faith in life can really help you navigate the ups and downs of life, because with the 8th house and the 12th house, to be fair, especially if there's a strong contact here and there are no, let's say, significant benefic influences, you could have a situation where, a lot of challenges, a lot of ups and downs, a lot of situations in life where you feel like the rug is just being pulled from under your feet. And the way to kind of navigate this is to always maintain a very strong belief system, to always have that inner faith in a higher power, that this is happening for a reason. Try to be flexible, because what doesn't bend breaks, that kind of thing. This is the kind of configuration where it's a good idea to keep that saying in mind. But the good news, let's say, is very sharp intuition. So you can use that intuition in understanding the people around you, and you need to learn to trust it first and foremost, because we live in a world that is very left-brained. So not a lot of people will be open to things like intuition or even esoteric knowledge. Again, with this placement, you could be into tarot, you could be into astrology as well with this placement, which, are generally seen as non-conventional forms of knowledge. But you need to learn to trust and to sharpen your intuition. And that's going to help you get by in life. So you could make it big in areas that have to do with anything to do with research, especially research that is connected to 12th house matters. So 12th house can be, again, areas connected to places of isolation. So it could be prisons, hospitals, Any kind of hospital, again, could be rehab centers, could be spiritual retreats, could be religious places, places of worship. So you can study religions or faith or anything to do with faith and philosophy, for instance, even, or just the way that a person's subconscious influences their lives. So again, you could be great in psychotherapy, any field of psychotherapy. But any kind of research work or even work where you yourself have to spend long periods of time in isolation could be beneficial, could be areas where you get to shine. Anything to do with transformation as well, because like we have 12th house and 8th house, transformation is a theme there. So let's say working in restoration, rehabilitation yourself, again, working in rehab centers, that's a great area of emphasis or subject of interest for someone who has this configuration. You could also, for instance, 12th house can also show the sea, or it can show import-export businesses or working with foreigners. So having this influence on the 8th house can also, by the way, show that you can gain from you can gain as in financially from things that have to do with import export. Also, the interesting part about this is your in-laws. So your in-laws, and to some extent implicitly your spouse, is going to be maybe involved in these areas that I've mentioned previously, and or they have a high likelihood of coming from a foreign place, foreign lands, or just come from a different ethnic background, right? So already this could be, well, again, depending on how you see it and depending on what else is going on in your horoscope, it could be a positive or a negative. Some people like the idea of having foreigners in their family, others don't, right? One other interpretation of this is you could also have in-laws that are very religious. 12th house is religion. So yeah, depends again a lot on what else is going on there, what signs are involved, what nakshatras, what other planets, etc., etc. So I'm trying to stick to the general descriptions here. Also shows that you yourself could spend long periods of time in isolation in your life for whatever reason. Either maybe you impose it on yourself or it's imposed upon you, such as the situations we have had with the Rona since 2020, right? And these situations will have a huge transformative impact on you, for the better or for the worse. Again, depends a lot on what else is going on there, whether you have a lot of benefic aspects on these planets or not. But you could have positive transformations, right? So time spent in isolation, time spent meditating, going inwards, quieting your mind, getting in touch with that intuition, with your subconscious and also the collective subconscious. All of these things could bring about huge transformations in your life when it comes to your physical health as well as your mental health and your overall outlook. Could even help you, again, figure out new ways of making money. This could also show that when it comes to, let's say, your finances, you are better off getting a loan, for instance, from foreigners, people from foreign cultures. So like if you're interested in getting a bank loan, you're better off getting a foreign bank to invest your ideas rather than a local bank. That's just one example. It can also show you are easily going to be able to get loans. Again, this also depends to some extent on how benefic the rulers of these houses are and what other aspects you get, on these rulers. But yes, if you have some benefic influence with this configuration, you can easily get opportunities of investments, of making money that come from 12th house related areas. So again, anything that has to do with working in places of isolation, maybe maritime stuff, activities connected to the sea, religious activities, anything creative as well. Creative, especially things that are connected to the visual, connected to things that don't require a lot of physical expression. So, plastic arts, music to some extent, especially plastic arts, I would say, or photography, stuff like that. Not so much acting. Can also be writing, but again, a lot depends on what other influences you have. So yeah, these are some of the aspects that I wanted to cover. If you have the 12th house lord in the 9th house, it means that your father figure, your gurus or your teachers could come from foreign lands. So you could gain from foreign lands as well. So you can gain a lot of wisdom from foreigners, a lot of opportunities from foreign lands, because the 9th house is the house of opportunities. You can also get to travel abroad for studies, especially for higher education. So this means master's degree and above. 9th house also shows travel, and 12th house also shows travel. So with this combination, travel is a positive thing generally for you. Again, unless there are a lot of negative influences on these houses, a lot of malefic planets influencing these houses, generally you will get some good opportunities connected to travel. Traveling will generally be positive for you. For instance, if let's say you are an artist and you are suffering from creative block, it's a good idea to take a trip to a faraway foreign land, and you might subtly get inspiration. It can also show that you might choose to study, when it comes to higher education, you might choose to study topics connected to the 12th house. So 12th house can show anything that is creative to some extent, and it can also show spiritual topics, things that have to do with the unseen world. Can also be things that have to do with sexuality to some extent, but also religion, higher philosophy, stuff like that could definitely be topics of interest. But also studying, for instance, people who live in isolation, or any kind of profession where you will later have to work with people working or living in isolation. So again, this could be medical doctor to some extent, right? Because doctors have to work in hospitals, whether it's mental hospital, whether it's any kind of regular hospital. Depends on what other influences are there, right? So for medicine, I wouldn't go just based on this one connection. I would have to look for other influences to see repeating themes. But yeah, it could be, other situations of working with people in isolation. So it could be spiritual retreats, it could be prisons, maybe rehab centers, etc., right? So any kind of line of study that you might get into where you will end up working with these kinds of groups of people, that's a good idea. That could be something you could gain from. This can also show just gaining from travel in itself. So maybe working for a travel agency. It can also show that you, like I said, so opportunities coming from foreigners, people from foreign lands. Very specifically, not necessarily a plus, but again, depends on what else is going on there. Your spouse's younger sibling could be living abroad, moving abroad, maybe living abroad. But whether this is positive or negative depends on what else is going on in the horoscope. Also, I'm not sure if I mentioned this, but studying anything that has to do with the sea can also be a good thing, or even with beverages or pharmaceuticals, if I were to stretch it, but especially working with the sea. So I don't know, studying marine biology or something in higher education could definitely be something that you will end up gaining from later on. Pretty much, this is what I wanted to say. Also, the father figure can be someone who is really spiritual, religious, can give you a lot of spiritual knowledge, or can really influence your belief system growing up. Again, whether that's positive or negative depends on what else is going on, whether the lords of these houses are benefics or malefics, and a bunch of other factors, right? So I'm trying to stick to the generals here. Also, the father figure could be, so like I said, also father figure, just like teachers or gurus, could be foreigners coming from a foreign culture. And when I say foreign, I'm talking about cultures that are different from your country of origin, right? So if you are You could be, the child of immigrants, for instance, which case your parents would be of foreign origin. All right, if you have 12th house lord in the 10th house, 10th house is the house of career, 12th house is the house of isolation, of spiritual knowledge, a bunch of other things. So here, again, you could have a career, you could have opportunities or higher opportunities in a career and or social status if you go for 12th house related topics or work or business, depending on what it is you want to work. Right, so 12th house, again, related topics could mean working in isolation, working in hospitals, prisons, spiritual retreats, religious institutions. So any kind of situation that you can think of where working in isolation or working with people who are living and working in isolation is something of a requirement. Nowadays, it can also be just working from home, because a lot of people are working from home, and for most of them who are working from home, that is pretty much working in isolation, right? Because you only deal with your teammates through the internet. It can also show you can gain opportunities by using your imagination, your creativity. 12th house is also about imagination. Can also be plastic arts, especially by as compared to, let's say, the 5th house, which is like dramatic arts, or other artistic houses, right? So the 12th house is more about art forms that are subtle, that have to do with sharing feelings that are difficult to describe. So not so much about expressing yourself dramatically or anything flashy. It's more about sending emotions, subtle feelings through nonverbal methods. This is why I think of plastic arts, mostly like photography, stuff like that. That's more of 12th house. So painting, drawing, sketching, stuff like this, right? Maybe even movie making. Also, 12th house has to do with the sea, so any activity connected to the sea, like maritime, anything, marine biology. Again, depending a lot on what else is going on with the 12th, and the 10th houses, because you want to look at the full picture, not just one configuration. But yeah, just looking at the general description here for 12th house and 10th house being connected. So yes, activities connected to the sea, export, import businesses, working with foreigners, working for foreign cultures, multinational companies could be beneficial. You could be particularly advantaged when it comes to getting a job for, foreign businesses as opposed to local businesses. Also, if you choose to start a business, it's a good idea to keep this in mind. So if you're looking for investors or partners or anything like that, it's better for you to go for foreigners as opposed to local investors and so on and so forth. 12th house is also a pretty emotional house. So this means that you could be very motivated, or you could be especially motivated in your career when your emotions are engaged. So either your emotions or your faith. So professions where you feel you are giving your time, your energy, your resources to others, maybe working with charities as well, or doing volunteer work is something that can really help you in your career. Also, just working with people who are maybe from underprivileged backgrounds. Again, a lot depends on, the planets that are involved, the rulers of the 10th and the 12th houses, and so on and so forth, and nakshatras and signs and all that. But these are pretty much the general descriptions for 12th house lord in the 10th house. Oh, last but not least, the father figure can also be someone who has had a secretive profession, or someone who is somehow religiously inclined, or again, could have worked in isolation as well. Either the father figure or the mother figure, actually, or both, could have been working in isolation. Maybe people who did not really get the deserved recognition in their professional lives, but again, we'll not dwell on the negatives here. 12th house in the 10th, again, depending on what is going on there, can also show a good retirement, like getting a good retirement plan from, let's say, the company that you work for, or if you are self-employed, managing to save up enough money to retire well. Again, a lot depends on other configurations with this one. It can also show windfalls though. So again, let's say if you are laid off with this combination, it's likelier than usual that you will get a good compensation package, for instance, or you might have a kind of job where you don't really know, you don't really have a schedule, like a fixed schedule, maybe not a 9 to 5, you might have a weirder schedule, or you could be favored in jobs actually that are even requiring night shift work. So again, this makes me think of hospitals, but that's not the only option. There are plenty of jobs that require night shift work. So that could be a thing. But just also any kind of profession where you don't really have like a stable schedule, right? So maybe even a job where you could be called at any hours. That could be an area where you are favored. Now, whether you like it or not, that's debatable. And just saying, also maybe comment in the comment section. I'm curious to hear to hear what your experiences have been so far. Anyway, so 12th house Lord falling in the 11th house. This can show, again, you might gain from foreigners, foreign lands. It can also be gaining from import-export activities or businesses, dealings with foreigners. It can also be dealings with people from foreign cultures, from foreign lands, like I said. Also people living and working in isolation. So you could be gaining from, let's say, hospitals, prisons, retreats, spiritual retreats, rehab centers, or just any kind of activity where you work from home, actually, because nowadays 12th house can definitely mean just working from home. 11th house also is the house of friendships, and also the elder sibling. So if you have a contact between these, it could show, for instance, your elder sibling is living in a foreign land. It could even be that you maybe have a sibling who actually is a foreigner, and either they were born in a foreign land, or maybe they're a step sibling and, they have some kind of a foreign culture in the mix in their genetic background. And friends also could be coming from faraway lands, or they could be coming from different backgrounds, maybe not necessarily foreign lands, but somehow they're different ethnicity, maybe different religion. So you could be having a lot of friends that are multicultural. And this can also show gains from spiritual activities, because 12th house is about spirituality. So any kind of working with energy, working with intuition, any kind of activity where you develop your imagination, your intuition, stuff like that. These could be areas that you can gain from financially. And so subsequently, these also show good career paths for you, especially if you're interested in just making as much money as possible, as opposed to, let's say, doing something because you are passionate about it. This can definitely also show a tendency to be humanitarian, because the 12th house is about giving, it's about generosity, it's also about working with people who are maybe underprivileged. So there is this strong calling here to work with charities or to do volunteer work, and you should definitely give into that. That's something that can bring you a lot of good karma on the one hand, and a lot of benefits, and also just spiritually on a spiritual plane, could really help you mentally and emotionally. So that could be a thing, yes. If you are looking for, let's say starting a business, then any activity connected to the 12th house, like I mentioned, can be a good activity for you to do. Also, 12th house is about, the sea environments, maybe traveling by sea, ships, marine biology, stuff like that. So these are things that you could get into, and you might see good gains from them, basically. Yeah, that's pretty much what I can say with the 11th house. And if the 12th house falls into the 12th house, this one is a pretty interesting one. And there are some positives, definitely, and also some negatives. But the positives here are that, well, your enemies will tend to destroy themselves. The 12th house also shows that you have a very strong intuition here. So very, very strong intuition. This can also show that you're here to clear a lot of karma, but this may not necessarily be a positive. I mean, I guess it depends on how you look at it. You definitely will gain if you look at life from a spiritual perspective. So if whenever something bad happens to you, some kind of a loss, because with this placement, there could be significant loss happening in life, having a spiritual perspective, understanding, well, this is the higher plan and I am clearing off, let's say, bad karma, or I am acquiring characteristics and understandings that I need later on to fulfill my destiny. If you have this kind of spiritual perspective, then things will go more smoothly for you, all right? So you will be able to better navigate the challenges of life. With the 12th and the 12th, though, this shows a very spiritual perspective on life, probably a very strong desire, maybe even to the point of wanting to renounce a lot of material gains and benefits. So you could have this very strong desire to even isolate yourself with this placement, because 12th house is the house of isolation. So you could actually benefit at least part of the time from isolating yourself, taking time for yourself, doing things like meditation, yoga, going within, basically everything that has to do with going within and understanding your subconscious, understanding your feelings, all of these things, and also developing a good spiritual practice, irrespective of what that is, whether you choose a organized religion or something more new age. It doesn't really matter, as long as you cultivate this spiritual perspective on life, that there is a higher plan, that there is a higher, a higher plan, maybe not God, maybe not one God, but you know what I mean. Like, there's a higher plan and that we all fit into it, right? This is something that's gonna benefit you a lot, that you're gonna benefit from. And another thing is, you can definitely be gaining from working in isolation, working with people in isolation. So in places of worship, in spiritual retreats, in, let's say, rehab centers, in hospitals, prisons, stuff like this. You can be gaining from any of these activities. You might be drawn to these areas where you have to spend long periods of time in isolation. Also, dealing with people from foreign lands and foreign cultures. That could be a thing. You could also feel very drawn to traveling, especially to faraway lands. You could be the kind of people that, I haven't checked Elizabeth Gilbert's horoscope, but I wonder if she has this placement, because it would be a great explanation for Eat, Pray, Love. Yeah, that kind of activity. So like someone who takes off for a few months and goes to an ashram, or some kind of a retreat, or you tend to like actually find yourself maybe when you travel to faraway places and or for long periods of time, to foreign lands. And you might gain valuable insights into yourself, your subconscious, psychology even. So you might be better off at understanding yourself mentally, psychologically, and also because of that, acquire spiritual knowledge that you can share with the world. Another thing is, you could definitely become respected for spiritual knowledge with this placement, if you choose to, let's say, get into activities where you share this knowledge with the world. This can also show that you might have a very unique perspective of the world. You could have like really strange, no offense, really strange ideas. Again, this really makes me think of someone like David Lynch. I haven't checked his horoscope to see if he has this placement, but something like that. Like you could have a really unique perspective of things of the world. So you could do great as an artist as well. Any kind of artistic field where you share things with the world, you share your perspective, or a spiritual teacher, spiritual person as well, because you could be gaining valuable insights through just self-analysis, going within yourself, understanding your inner landscape, and just being as authentic as possible. And yeah, you could really gain a lot of knowledge spiritually from, like I said, things like meditation, isolation. Unfortunately, with this placement, there could also be significant loss happening in life, so that could also bring you to, let's say, the required level of suffering in life that would lead to spiritual awakenings or a more spiritual perspective on the world. Because I talked about this briefly also in the video where I talked about archetypes of Ketu, that suffering is pretty much an important component of acquiring spiritual knowledge and a more spiritual perspective on life. Let's say having an awakening, quote unquote, as people from the New Age communities would say. But yeah, to some extent, I personally definitely agree with that, that suffering is necessary in order to acquire, a spiritual perspective. So with this placement, let's say the silver lining is that any suffering you will go through will help you be more spiritual and more knowledgeable and be able to help others also with your knowledge. Also can help you become very creative. So you can be really, really creative, like even bordering on genius with this. But a lot depends on what else is going on in the individual horoscope to see which direction it's going to take. And you also want to check, of course, the planet that is involved here and other aspects to the 12th house. Yeah, this is pretty much what I can say with respect to the 12th house going through the 12 houses. The more positive aspects of it, right? So remember, I have done a part 1 with respect to this topic, and I will be linking it in the video description as well as in the pinned comment. So yeah, if you want to check it out, go ahead and check it out. I will also mention before I sign off, please subscribe to this channel if you haven't done so already, if you have found value in any of my content. And consider clicking the notifications bell if you want to see when I will post a new video. And also, if you're interested in details about the members section, check out the video description, because I've added timestamps there, so you can check the introductory part of the video where I talked about the membership options, perks, prices, and other details. Right, if you're curious. And also, last but not least, I also have a reading option. So again, if you want to check out more information about that, also refer to the introductory part of this video. I have added timestamps in the video description as well as in the pinned comment. And last but not least, I also have a tarot channel, and I will be linking it in the video description as well as in the pinned comment. It's called Martine's Tarot. And yeah, I am posting there semi-regularly at least. So if you're interested in tarot, go ahead and check it out. Maybe subscribe. I would greatly appreciate it. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope to see you at my next video. Bye!